First, one layer of super sheen, just lightly wiped on so that it does not pick up a lot of the water-based stains. I will put on a second coat later on when this coat is dried, but that's all I do. The satin sheen is dried, and now I'm cutting out the parts with an X-Acto blade. I like to use that when I've done the outlines like this with swivel knife first. It's now just cutting through the little thickness that remains. Where I'm going to stitch, I am going to glue the two pieces of leather together, and for that I use a water-based contact cement. Just a very thin coat on the edge. It's just really to keep the leather in place, to make one's life a bit easier on the stitching side. The glue had time to dry, and now it's just placing these two guys on top of each other. Glue them in place. There we go. Ready for the stitching. Ways of stitching. One will be the classic way with an awl in one hand, a needle on either side of the thread, and then a stitching pony to hold the work. But I'll also show on this one to achieve the same basic work with one needle on one side of the thread, no stitching pony, but still a basic saddle stitch in the end. And that's what I'll show on this sheet. Just a quick aside tutorial, maybe for those of you who don't know this method of threading a needle. The first thing is you put the thread through the needle just about 1/4 of an inch there, and then you put the needle through the thread. So there I've got the needle piercing the thread. Then you scoot up that. Now you can pull the thread further through the needle, scoot up the thread again, pull it further through until those two meet each other right on the end. Then you take the long piece of thread and simply pull it so that its loop goes over, and there the needle has been nicely threaded, ready for sewing. The row that I'm going to stitch, I'm simply going to go in and out. So now from the top, next hole is from the bottom up, and so this one goes quite fast. Just one row, a running stitch in and out, and I pull the stitches fairly snug. I have reached the end of the first row. I've stitched all the way around, just in and out, like you can see there. Now what I'm going to do is go back, but there's a small little trick when you go back. I am choosing the front side of the sheath. I call this the front side, and I'm choosing that as the side from which I will put the needle into the hole on this side closest to the edge, so that it is on that side of the thread that is already in the hole. Here I put the needle in on the inside of the leather so that my stitches lie diagonally when I'm done. Okay, so putting it in from this side, I am deliberately hitting the top of the whole side of the hole that's closest to the edge, and that's where I put the needle in. When I work it from the other side, I'm going to put it in closest here on the inside, and we should see that for the needle coming out as well. It is coming out below now that thread. So from this side it goes from below the thread where it comes out to above the thread there. So I put it in, it goes in there, and that way the stitching is consistent all around and it looks neat. With the holes as big as this, you probably won't see that much of a difference, but if you don't follow this consistent pattern, then you will see that the stitching is not all that neat. When it goes in, it's at the top, and so I'll proceed all the way back to the beginning. The stitching is done all around the edge, with the thread making a figure 8 and passing through each hole twice, the same as a formal saddle stitch. Just a quick note on the color scheme. I saw this first in some Ethiopian and South Sudanese leatherwork, where they would actually do decorative stitching in white on leather, and then have in that case, 1/4 of an inch wide, or maybe a bit more wide, black dyed line on which they do the stitching. Okay. When I've done the last stitch up to the end, all that I do now is simply backtrack. I like to do it about 5 stitches or so, in this case, with the needle. Now there is more thread in the holes, and going back is slightly more difficult. Now my pattern is a bit different because the stitches run diagonally like that. So I'm going to come out on top. I'm going to put the needle in closest to the bottom for doing the back stitching. Sometimes it goes through easy. If it's difficult, I just use a needle nose pliers to pull it in the other direction. I'll end with a needle on the back, so both my threads will be on the back, and I'll simply cut them off there.